Good morning, everyone. I'm John Newstreet, President and CEO of the Kissimmee Osceola County Chamber of Commerce, with our weekly webinar series. And this week we have a wonderful guest who I'll introduce just momentarily. But as a reminder, here at the Chamber, we are champions for business and community. And so we bring you this webinar to get you information to help survive COVID-19, prepare you for what's next. And so we'll look a little bit today on an interesting topic of consumer confidence. Again, these webinars are archived, so if you aren't able to watch the whole show with us right now live, it'll be archived on our Facebook page, our website at KissimmeeChamber.com, COVID-19 resource and rebound and recovery page, and then finally on our YouTube channel as well. So we encourage you to watch this in its entirety and look at some of our archive footage to help you be more successful in your business. And lastly, again, this is a Facebook Live thread, so if you have a comment or a question, we encourage you to put it into the Facebook thread. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll address it as best we can in the next 30 minutes. So without further ado, our guest here on screen with me is Dr. Sean Snaith. Sean Snaith, Ph.D., is the director of the University of Central Florida's Institute for Economic Competitiveness and a nationally recognized economist in the field of business and economic forecasting. Dr. Snaith is frequently interviewed in international, national, and regional media. He's a sought-after speaker known for his engaging and humorous presentations. He has built a national reputation for his unique ability to explain complex subject matter in a digestible manner. He earned praise from one business editor for having, quote, an uncanny knack of making economics not only understandable, but interesting, unquote. Dr. Snaith holds a BS in economics from Allegheny College and an MA and Ph.D. in economics from Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Snaith, thank you so much for being with us. We are privileged, and I personally look forward to hearing some of your perspective on the current times.
Well, thank you. Good morning. Thank you, John. Yeah, I think I might add to that bio to spice it up a little bit that, listening to me speak gives you immunity to COVID-19. I think that could help draw some people to my talks. But this is, an interesting time. I used to refer to the Great Recession that began in 2007, ended in June of 2009 is the recession of a lifetime. But I guess I spoke too soon, or I lived too long, because we just went through another one. This recession is historical in a couple of ways. It's historical in terms of its depth, its severity. This recession that we went through because of the COVID-19 public health measures was deeper than the 2008-2009 recession. So it was the worst recession since the Great Depression. It also will likely be historical in that it will go down as the shortest recession in U.S. economic history. And again, this was not born out of, this was not your father's Oldsmobile, or however that commercial used to go. This was not your father's recession. This was different. The public health measures that were implemented in March effectively pulled the plug on large swaths of our economy, essentially shutting them down and plunging the economy into recession, and so that's unique. Recessions don't happen in an instant. Typically, it's generally a process over several months or several quarters, even, where the economy slowly moves from a peak into a downward path in terms of output. But we didn't slowly move; we just stepped off the cliff, or I guess we were pushed off the cliff. And so that led to the severity of it. But the flip side of it was that when these measures started to be rolled back in May, the economy, I believe, began to grow again. And so the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is a think tank in Massachusetts, has a committee called the Business Cycles Dating Committee, and they are responsible for pointing out the timing of when the economy reaches its peak and then begins to go into recession. And typically they don't make that announcement till 12 or 18 months after the economy has hit its peak. That is, they don't tell us that the recession began until 12 or 18 months after it has already started. And there's a reason for that, because they want to have final data and they want to be accurate, but they didn't have to wait. They announced a few weeks back that the recession or the peak of the business cycle, this historic expansion, which was the longest expansion in U.S. history, reached its peak in February. So that meant as of March, we were in recession. As of April, we were in recession. It's my belief that in May, the economy emerged from recession. Whether they'll agree with me or not, I think it'll likely be May or June. So we're talking about a 2-3 month recession in terms of length. The shortest previous recession was 6 months. So again, historic in that way as well. The national jobs report for May was a big surprise, and one of the reasons I think that the economy came out of recession in May. There were 2.5 million jobs added to business payrolls that month, and the expectation prior to the data release was that there was going to be 7.5 million jobs lost. So that was a 10 million job swing, and that's a pretty big error. And then the retail sales data for May showed a growth of 17.7%, which was the largest single monthly jump. So with those two pieces of data, I feel pretty good, and the nature of the recession, in saying that this recession is over. So, what does the COVID recession share in terms of similarities or differences with the previous two recessions? Well, the 2008-2009 recession, they're similar, as I said, in terms of severity, with this one being even worse. But they're very different in some ways, in particular for Florida, in that at the core of that last recession was the housing market bubble and its collapse, which subsequently led to a freezing of credit markets and a financial plunge in equity markets as well. We don't have that now, and that's a good thing, because that weighed on our recovery in Florida for a long time. That destruction of home equity wealth affected a lot more people than a plunge in the stock market does, and it took a much longer time to recover than stock market declines do. So that weighed down on Florida's recovery for years after the national recession ended, and that, in my opinion, the recession in Florida didn't end fully until 2012. So we were stuck in a hole, a much deeper hole than most of the country, and it took us a long time to get out. I don't think that's the case. We don't have that burden. We don't have that yoke of the housing market weighing down consumers for years. In fact, a couple of months, I think, where sales were being impacted because nobody knew if they should have an open house or they should put their house on the market. Some disruption in housing, but that's very temporary. And talking to a lot of mortgage brokers over these months, they're seeing huge demand for purchases. Not refinance. Refinancing was big as well, because of course mortgage rates plunged to historical lows in the midst of all this. But they've indicated that really the big boom now is on the purchase side. So I think the housing market is in good shape. Prices have not declined, even though sales have declined. And I think we exit the COVID recession in the housing market in the same way we entered it, with the big problem being a shortage of housing and low inventories. And so that's a problem that bodes for higher economic activity going forward, whereas the last recession, the housing market really suppressed economic activity after the recession ended. This recession also shares some similarities with the 2001 recession, which its primary causes were the collapse of the dot-com bubble, but also the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And so that, I think the terrorism impact on tourism is important here, and similar to the potential impact of COVID on tourism here in our region and in the state. There will be a lingering fear factor regarding COVID-19, and the coverage of the virus in the media doesn't help that matter very much. You see now a lot of focus on the number of cases, not the number of deaths from COVID-19, not the number of hospitalizations from COVID-19, but just the number of cases. Well, the fact that that's going up shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, while we were all hiding under our blankies, the boogeyman didn't go away. The virus didn't just say, "Oh, no, everybody's staying at home. I guess I'll, find somewhere else to go." And so this increase in cases, to me, is not alarming. The main thrust, we wanted to flatten the curve. That was the initial public health goal, and prevent our healthcare system from being overwhelmed. And I think we were very successful at doing that. But now it seems like the public health goalposts are shifting, and that's problematic, because if people start looking at the number of cases and heaven forbid, think we need to re-implement some of these lockdowns, then we're not going to be talking about a recession. We're going to be talking about a depression. There was very little consideration of the economic costs of this public health policy, especially early on in the process. There was zero consideration, and it has done, tremendous damage to the economy. I think we'll see second quarter GDP contract by more than 30%. And we saw nationally 37 million people in a matter of weeks flung into unemployment. So I mean, this is, and I look at the numbers, and I've been following this since the beginning of the year, because I was concerned. Nobody knew much about this virus. Certainly, the Communist Party of China was not forthcoming with data and information about it, and because of that, I was like, well, what kind of, this pandemic, what does it mean? And I refreshed my fading knowledge of the Spanish pandemic, and I saw, that spread like wildfire across Europe. I mean, in a matter of weeks, it had just spread across the continent remarkably. And this is in an era where we don't have the kind of air travel and connectivity that we do today. And I also was looking at the fatality rates, and Spanish flu killed indiscriminately across age groups, killed indiscriminately regardless of whether you had a pre-existing or underlying health condition. In January, February, that was not what I was seeing. Johns Hopkins has a website with the GIS data that tracks cases and deaths and other information globally, and this didn't look, and still doesn't look, anything like Spanish flu. So, I mean, early in the year, I was saying, okay, I think this will slow GDP growth, but it's not in and of itself going to plunge us into recession. Well, I couldn't have imagined the draconian public health measures that were undertaken, in some cases are still in place, and ultimately led to that. But the fear factor, like 9/11, people, it took time for people to get over that, some longer than others. And of course, we implemented this giant agency, TSA. We fought a couple of wars over terrorism, and it took several years of no terrorist events, I think, for that fear to fade. COVID's going to be different than that. I don't think this is going to be years of extended fear, for a couple of reasons. One, data about the virus, the more we learn about it, and two, the science and research into therapeutic treatment and ultimately a vaccine against the virus. There was never going to be a vaccine against terrorism, and so that's very different. And I think the data, as I said early on, we didn't collectively know much about this virus, and it led to some pretty wild forecasts about the number of deaths that were supposed to happen. In early March, there were predictions from the Imperial College in London that over 2 million people in the United States would die. Well, that's a scary number. And, while any individual death, of course, is a tragedy, the collective number of deaths are not even close to that. I mean, globally, it's less than 500,000, on a planet of 8 billion people, I might add. So as we learn more about it, now we also know that, if you are under 65, the chance that you'll die of COVID-19 is pretty small. And if you're younger still, school-aged children have virtually zero chance of dying from COVID-19. That wasn't the case with the Spanish flu. Also, we're learning more with these studies that are looking at antibodies, just how far the virus spread. I think it was far more widespread before anybody knew what COVID-19 was. In California, which has had pretty low number of deaths, in 2019 there were 45,000 seats on jets that flew directly from China to California, including several flights a day from Wuhan province. And yet, there were not the deaths that we saw. And I think some of the initial studies there suggest that the virus is pretty widespread in California, and many people got it, didn't know they had it, developed immunity to it. So I think when we learn more about it, and when we learn that the fatality rate of exposure to the virus, that's what matters. What we mainly are getting numbers are case fatality rates. That is, people that end up going to the hospital because they're sick enough to warrant that, and then they get tested and test positive for COVID-19. But the fatality rate of exposure is what's important, and that number continues to drop. And if it gets closer still to what seasonal flu fatality contact rates are, we don't shut down everything and hide during cold and flu season. And then on the other side of things, if a vaccine is found, then COVID-19 becomes a nothing burger. Or if there's an effective therapeutic treatment, so that if you get COVID-19, you can take this treatment and you won't die from it. So if those things happen, and I think they're likely to happen faster than most people think, for a couple of reasons. One, there's a tremendous financial incentive. If you're the biopharm company that comes up with this therapeutic or this vaccine, you've literally got a global market. Okay. So, I mean, there's riches to be had here in finding treatment. And then the second thing is there's this big financial carrot, but we're also, shortening the stick, if you will, in terms of the regulatory process that these companies have to go through. And some of these hurdles are being lowered to speed up the process. So initially they said, it's going to be 12 or 18 months before a vaccine. And historically that might have been the case, but this is not, a situation we've seen before historically. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something before the end of the year, quite frankly. And if that happens, well, that fear goes away. But in the meantime, I think what you see people doing are they're trying to make outward signs to reassure customers, that they're taking steps, in terms of changing cleaning protocols. I think that, hand sanitizing stations are going to, will be, ubiquitous going forward. The wearing of masks, social distancing, taking temperatures, although that's a little bit of some false comfort in some ways. But if it makes people feel better and addresses that fear, then that's going to be important as well. Again, I'm not sure that the fear factor is as high as media coverage would like you to believe it to be, quite frankly. But we're seeing evidence of that. You see. I couldn't go, but on Memorial Day weekend, I was checking out beach cams around the state, and it didn't seem like people were too frightened of COVID-19. I think that as these restrictions are lifted, there's a lot of pent-up demand that is spending that doesn't happen during a recession, that gets released when the recession ends. And I would say it's pent-up demand squared this time, because not only did people hold back on spending during the recession, at least in part, places they might have spent it were shut down. So there's that pent-up demand, but then there's the fact that they were pent up at home for a couple of months and are eager to get out and get back to something normal, and maybe get away from those people that were formerly known as their loved ones, and get a chance to go out and experience life again. So I'm fairly optimistic. I think this will be a relatively sharp recovery. It won't be a perfect V. I think it'll be more of a bent V, sharp recession and a sharp recovery, but not as sharp as the recession was. So it's not going to be symmetric, the recovery, but it's still going to be at a pretty good trajectory. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
Well, I don't want you to stop, but we do have a question from the audience, and I have a few things. So the question from the audience here: the Spanish flu was bigger in the second wave, correct? And I'm not sure if you can. There
was a second wave of the Spanish flu, but again, COVID-19 isn't the Spanish flu. It's not killing indiscriminately. It doesn't spread as rapidly as the Spanish flu. I mean, there are more and more contact tracing studies that are being released that show, you're not gonna get COVID-19 walking past the avocados in the grocery store, and someone goes down the same aisle who has the virus. You need to be in closer proximity for extended periods of time. And if you look at the deaths, the real concentration of deaths in the U.S. And globally in many instances have been in convalescent or geriatric hospitals or homes. These are people that are very old, have underlying health conditions, and are locked in the same building all the time. They're not going in and out, so they're just constantly exposed. And this was a recipe for a large number of deaths, unfortunately. But we know that now. We know that the children going to daycare is not going to lead to them dying. But if they're coming home from daycare and grandma's on a ventilator, grandma's on oxygen, and she's sick and she's being taken care of, mom, then they need to be vigilant about hygiene and disinfection and things like that. But for most people, this is not a big thing. And as I said, the number of cases, number one, cases are going to go up anytime you have increased testing. And I'll also tell you something that's happening, at least anecdotally, on a personal level. I've got a daughter just graduated high school, and it seems like her coterie of friends are playing this a version of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon when it comes to COVID-19. That is, somebody without symptoms finds out that they tested positive for the virus, and they're all saying, well, Susie, is dating John, and John's friends with Pablo, and Ricky and John were over at Amy's house, and they're trying to figure out how they might have been exposed, and they're all going to get tested. I think in part so they can post it on social media. At least that's what I've told my daughter. Her ultimate goal is to be able to say I'm COVID-19 positive, or I have the antibodies, because she's had zero symptoms to justify tested, and she's 18. So anyway, yeah, they'll cases are going to rise. I think when we get into traditional cold and flu season, when viruses tend to spread more widely, we'll see more cases. But between now and then, that big carrot to find therapeutics or a vaccine is still hanging there, and I'm sure a lot of companies want it.
Well, you mentioned earlier lingering fear, which is really prevalent. The Florida Chamber's early moniker on this was "Follow facts, not fear." We have a video we're going to release later today highlighting a local business that is practicing those perfect protocols and participating in our campaign, We've Opened Safely. And all this is geared towards consumer confidence. We're doing the right thing, and if we do the right thing, we can go back to living our lives. So you mentioned lingering fear. I hope people watch that video and support our local businesses. But the angst is towards media because that's what's in front of us. But I wonder if you can address the impact of politics. Is there something that is nonpartisan, if they all came together and said the right message, that we wouldn't be playing this game of shut down or open up, that we could find a solution where things get on track quicker and everybody's safe?
Oh yeah. Like I'm sitting here in my cargo shorts, and I'm going to be able to solve the political problems of this country. Well, maybe I should declare and run for president, or maybe the emperor of the globe if I can fix that. Listen, the politics aren't going to go away. It's unfortunate. I suspect if there was a different occupant in the White House, if Hillary Clinton had won, none of this would be going on, honestly. But there's a hugely antagonistic relationship between this administration and the media, and of course between this administration and maybe both political parties, quite frankly. But it's interesting, right? Because apparently this virus, one thing we've learned is that it can discern what type of large gathering and for what purpose it's occurring. And so if it's sort of a nice, moral gathering of 10,000 people, then that's okay, I guess. But if you're gathering for something, as abhorrent as going to church or something, that's an unsafe gathering. So I don't think politically there's going to be any kumbaya moment over COVID-19. I think the data is going to continue to come out. I think people you have to ask yourselves what matters. Is it the total number of cases? Not everybody dies from it, so who cares, right? If people have all kinds of viruses that are asymptomatic and don't do anything. We don't count those. Sorry?
Well, you mentioned a kumbaya moment. We had that for a brief period after 9/11. I mean, everybody was flying the flag. There was no partisanship. I don't expect to have it here, but these are different times. It's just kind of, I guess, I've heard it related to kind of the technology curve where you have 1/3 early adopters. They go out and get that very first iteration of whatever the new technology is because they're excited about it, an iPhone, say. And then you got about another third that kind of adopted in time because they've seen it works and others have it. And then you've got those lagging 1/3. And so I think I've heard that related to the fear factor of people wanting to leave their home and come back out into society with this fear of the invisible pandemic. Have you seen that? Can you relate to maybe that third that we're just in early stages still and people will eventually come out, or is this just crazy times?
To be honest with you, I don't think it's choosing to get the new iPhone is a little different than choosing to go back to work and go back shopping. I don't think it's a third. There will be a fraction of people who will be hesitant under any circumstances, and there's a portion of the population that should be hesitant under any circumstances. I mean, the elderly with underlying health conditions, they need to take every precaution. I'm not necessarily saying sit at home, with the blinds drawn, but get a good mask, not a cloth mask. That's just a feel good thing. That doesn't stop a tiny virus. sanitize, wash your hands, all that. I mean, yes, if you're in that susceptible demographic, you have to remain vigilant. But man, the overwhelming majority, super majority, this is not the threat that's being portrayed. I mean, we've watched too much Walking Dead. We've watched too much, movies about pandemics where, somebody just touches somebody and they die, bleeding out the eyeballs 2 days later. I think as time goes on and the worst scenarios don't happen, then that fear will continue to melt away. And again, the data and the science can just make this all go away in an instant, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've crossed the 30-minute mark together, and so as we close out, I just, our good friend Maritza has started a new hashtag, Sean 2020. So even in your cargo shorts, I think you ought to run for office. Why not?
Yeah. See, that's the politics I have at UCF. They want to see me suffer. They want to see people. I mean, skeletons have skeletons in their closet, for God's sakes. I can't run for office.
Well, if we close out, whether it's talking to the voters or in this instance, talking to our businesses, is there one final clear message you might share with them on consumer confidence, where we are now or where we may be in the near future?
Yeah, things are looking up, and this too will pass. And I think sometimes as humans are tend to be myopic. It's short-sighted. It's hard to see beyond your current situation, and you feel like what's happening now is going to persist forever. That's not going to be the case. And early indications with high-frequency economic data are suggesting that the recovery is underway, and it's pretty strong.
Good. That's great. Well, we appreciate your time. I enjoyed the conversation, and we just can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge. We appreciate UCF being a great partner to our chamber, and I'm sure we'll have some follow-up conversations when it fits into your schedule and people are banging for Sean Snaith for president or governor or whatever you choose to pursue.
All right. Maybe dog catcher.
All right. Well, thanks for your time, and to all our watchers, thank you very much for following us, and reach out to your chamber if there's anything we can do to help you. Thank you.